Welcome to the DAR Museum Online. I am Sarah Kersfeld, the coordinator of museum engagement and outreach here at the DAR Museum. And today is our monthly Tuesday Talk lecture series. We present these on the second Tuesday of each month, highlighting topics related to the DAR Museum's collections, from decorative arts to American social history to best practices in object preservation. Every Saturday, we have the family activity from 10 to 2, and this month they are making President Lincoln hats. I've seen them, they're very cute. Coming up, we also have a big event at the museum. If you are anywhere in the area, we welcome you to join us on Saturday, March 29th for our second annual Women's History Costume Party. We're going to dress up, celebrate, drink, eat, and dance the night away. You can find all that information on our website. Our next Tuesday talk is going to be on March 11th, and we will have our very own Patrick Sherry, curator. He's presenting Illuminating New York, Edward F. Caldwell and Company, Inc., for a look at the impact of the Caldwell firm that they had on public buildings and private residences. And Patrick is our curator of historic furnishings and interiors. There will be this and a full list of all of our upcoming programs and lectures on our website at www.dar.org/museum. You can select calendar of events or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at DAR Museum. We have family programs, Girl Scouts, symposium, tours, evening events, and more. So with all that out of the way, let me introduce to you Carrie Blough. She is our curator registrar at the DAR Museum, and she has worked at the museum since 2014. Previously, she was a curator at several museums and historical societies in Maryland and Pennsylvania. Carrie is the curator of American-made earthenware, cooking equipment, textile processing equipment, firearms, and militaria, tools, and the Native American collections. And she currently resides in Maryland. So welcome, Carrie. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you all for bearing with me as I figure out my audio problems. And I had to start my slideshow. There we go. Nope. Okay. How's that? Well, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to talking about this because I do like talking about cookware so much because it's such a part of our lives now, and it was just as much a part of lives in the past. And so I think it's always interesting to talk about how things were used, what was most common, what was used a lot, because we know what we use a lot in our own kitchens. And I think it's always really enlightening when we can compare what we do today with what might have been done and what was done in the past. So today we're going to talk about cookware, copper cookware. And, thanks to people like Martha Stewart, everybody loves to decorate with copper now, but in the past, it was a really important material to make cookware out of. And so today we're going to talk about all the different types of goods that were made out of copper for in the kitchen specifically. And so my goal today is to talk to you about what forms we have and how it was used and how it was purchased, how it was made, very briefly how it was made. I'm no coppersmith expert, so that I'll cover briefly. But I'm sure everybody knows what copper looks like. It is this beautiful gold, orange, red color, and it's very soft and malleable. That's why you'll see things with lots of dings and dents in it from the past, like our beautiful copper tea kettle here. It's beautiful, but it does have a little bit of, wear to it. But what was really great about it for cookware is that it conducts heat and electricity really well. And so if you want to heat things up, it will heat up pretty quickly. And so it's a good material for cookware, for work in homes and stuff like that you hear about. But there were other types of metals used in the 18th century, including cast iron, wrought iron, brass, and those types of things. But today we're just talking about copper. So we're talking about copper cookware, but it was also used for other items in the past. And as I said, it was a good conductor of heat. So it was great for different types of warmers, from a bed warmer, which you see in the bottom, to a foot warmer, which you see over on the left. And these were filled with hot water, and they could, make things nice and toasty. Take the chill off of beds in the middle of February in New England. And then you'll also see a watercolor sketch by the artist Lewis Miller. And he's one of my favorites. He depicted life in Eastern PA in the 19th century, throughout much of the 19th century. And here he has Mr. Jefferson, who is a coppersmith in York, PA, and this is in 1799. And he's holding a still. And stills were very common household items. I'm not really going to talk a lot about them. I'll talk a little bit about them because it wasn't really used in the kitchen. That was used more in a, you know, in the barn or an outbuilding type thing. But most farmers did do a lot of distilling to make their own cider and that sort of thing. Yeah. First, I think it's important to talk about how they got it, because where did you find it? Did you buy it in the store? Yes. In the early part of the country's history, in the early colonial period, it was almost all imported because there weren't copper mines, there weren't coppersmiths here, and so they were importing everything, and they needed their tools and their equipment for making it. But eventually, coppersmiths did settle in the country and start making copper here. But as you can see from these advertisements that I have from 1716 up to 1720, and I could have filled this entire slideshow with nothing but advertisements for copper goods throughout the 18th century. But you get the point with just these few, that they are selling goods, they are getting them imported from Europe, mostly England, and they are selling them. And so there's copperware, there's just copper pewter, it's just copper, and people knew what that meant. A lot of times it meant tea kettles, because everybody needed a tea kettle. There were a few places that they found copper ore in this country early on. In 1705, they found it in Simsbury, Connecticut, and the community formed sort of a cooperative of mining the ore, but it was shipped to England. They would ship ore that they found here to England to be transformed into sheets, because copper was made best, was best used in sheet form for the coppersmith to work with. And then that would be shipped, sheets would be shipped back to the United States. And there was also copper found in mines in Maryland, in Cecil and Carroll counties. And that was before the Revolutionary War, but it ended up being really difficult to mine. And so they relied on copper sheeting from England and Europe for a long time. So here are some more. As I said, I could have so many of them. And here are some of the more of the goods that were found or that were shipped over. Kettles and pots, because that's what so many tools in the kitchen were, some type of pot or kettle. And a pot is a round-bellied thing, and a kettle is a straight-sided thing. And so we see copper tea kettles and copper coffee pots, and in almost every purveyor's ad, you will find copper listed. And so if we did have the sheets shipped here, who was making it? It was the coppersmith. And it's interesting, the terminology, I always like to use the correct terminology for things. The coppersmith is the craftsman who made items from copper, and a brazier made stuff from brass. But in the past, in the 18th and early 19th centuries, those terms were used interchangeably. And coppersmith was used to describe someone who made both stuff from both copper and brass. So I'm just using coppersmith today because that is pretty self-evident. So coppersmiths trained as apprentices, like many tradesmen and craftsmen. They trained from a very young age, from 14 all the way into their 20s, or they could be indentured even too. And mainly they learned from patterns, and they learned from the masters and how to put these pieces together, how to cut them out, and the details about applying appendages and that sort of thing. Copper couldn't be heated as hot as iron because it couldn't withstand that heat. So it was often heated to form a shape or a mold, but just like red hot, not like really hot like a blacksmith uses. And after it was formed into these shapes, like a tea kettle or a pot, a planishing tradesman would work on that, also a coppersmith, but he would take something and smooth it. So it's sort of like burnishing it to get those little hammer marks that we see out of it that we find very endearing now. But those were, they really tried to smooth that out to make it nice and even. So it was sort of like a polishing. And then finally, the copper was, the good was tinned, and that meant pouring hot tin into it, sort of swirling it around until it was nice and coated, so that traces of copper wouldn't be absorbed into the food. So that's the basics on it, and I just have some images here of a coppersmith's workshop and someone doing some planishing. But then there were some details that were important with copper because it was sold by weight. The copper sheets were often very thin. The heavier weight was usually reserved for things like the bottom of stew pans or shipbuilding and those kinds of things. But since it was so soft and thin, they added a thin gauged wire around the rim to give it body, and so it wouldn't collapse or fold in or anything. So you can see the top picture has a heavy gauge wire around the top of it. And so that was one of the things that the coppersmiths had to do to make sure it was the solid piece of copperware. And then on the bottom left, you'll see appendages were riveted or soldered to the piece, like these handles, and then pieces were dovetailed. You can see on the bottom left how then it was soldered also on the dovetails. And then you can see on the right, there's a little rivet there too. So they had their ways of putting all these things together. And there aren't a lot of books to describe how they did this because the information was very proprietary. So they were sort of, they kept their information to themselves about how to make the stuff. And so then, okay, I'm going to talk about stills for a little bit now, but I'm telling you honestly that I picked this ad because this guy's name is Peacock Bigger, and I think that's just a fabulous thing. I'm putting that on my list of cat names. Well, he was in Philadelphia, and this is from the 1740s, and from this ad you can see he made stills and all sorts of copper goods, Dutch ovens, kettle pots, stew pans, tea kettles, all sorts of stuff. And stills were so common at this time, as I mentioned earlier, because most farmers made something distilled during the winter months when they were waiting to plant. And often it was apple cider that they were distilling. And the sheets for these were imported from England again. And so depending on how big they were, this is how big the coppersmith could make things. So Peacock Bigger only made stills from 150 gallons. And so they could be up to 200 gallons. And those were for more bigger productions. The ones that were under the stills that were under about 100 gallons, those were for like home use, farm use, that sort of thing. And I like this ad also because at the bottom you'll see Note Bene, he mends and tins old copper work. So that was another way for coppersmiths to make some income, was to repair copper goods. From mending a torn tea kettle to replacing the bottom of a tea kettle, because those could get really burned, and other minor repairs, and that meant the owner didn't have to buy an entirely new piece. So there's a basic summary of what was made and how. And again, as I said, I don't pretend to know that much about how to make copper goods at all. So what I do know is how people used them and who was using them. And so when you think about who was using copper at the time, it was more expensive than wrought iron or cast iron. And so this was not the super wealthy people did have a lot of copper also, but middling class could have it too. However, there were some places in the backcountry that did not see a bit of copper. Basil Hall was traveling in Georgia in 1828, and he noted in his diary, he was from Scotland, he said, "Our loaf sugar was accidentally left somewhere on the road, and the substitutes were nowise tempting to the eye or to the palate. At very few of the houses where we stopped did we meet with either a tea kettle or a teapot, so that upon 2 occasions we had to boil the water in a frying pan and to make tea in a common earthenware jug." And he was outraged by this so much that he put it in his diary, and thank goodness, because this is just a great resource for how important the right equipment was for making whatever it was you were trying to make. And then another good resource is Jacob Engelbrecht. He is a fellow from Frederick, Maryland. And in the 19th century, he kept a very extensive diary that tells us about so much of life in Frederick County and in general in the 19th century. And he wrote in 1831 that he bought a copper boiler. And boilers were big kettles or pots that were meant for boiling water for maybe laundry or something like that. So boiling large amounts of water. And he wondered, it is a strong, thick copper. How long will it last, he wondered. And then when you look ahead to 1868, he writes, boiler good yet. So it was a good boiler, and it was lasting him a long time. And that's really fun to see, the update that he gave us. And he was very thorough. He also did inventories in Frederick County, estate inventories, and he listed a lot of copper in those inventories. And so, as I mentioned, copper has been used for a very long time in the U.S., or in the colonies, and then eventually the U.S. And it was found in Jamestown. These are pieces of scrap that was found in Jamestown. Archaeologists have recovered 8,000 pieces of scrap copper sheet in the excavations. For the first 10 years of the Virginia colony, the colonists traded foodstuffs with the Indians. They would give them copper goods, kettles, especially to Native Americans in the local Native Americans in exchange for food. And so that became very important as a source of food for them. And then the Native American trade with copper in general in the colonies was really big in the early 18th century. In fact, very, very beginning, from the 1500s, 1580s, the Spanish were trading kettles with Native Americans since the 1500s. In 1586, they traded 209, and then in 1587, they traded another 200. And the French also traded in copper. They would trade things like kettles and harness bells and pendants and all sorts of goods that Native Americans were interested in. And I did find a source that shows us that in the 1580s in Virginia, traders noted that a copper kettle could be traded with Native Americans for 50 animal skins. So that was how much a copper kettle alone was worth. And Native Americans would repurpose the copper goods. If they wore out, they didn't have a coppersmith nearby to go and repair, they would turn them into jewelry, into decorative items that I have on the screen here. These were found at a Seneca site in New York. And copper was also found at pre-contact sites like Adena and Hopewell, but those were not part of the European copper trade. So that's a general history of who was using copper and how long it's been used here, and for what purposes. So I think now it's a good time to talk about, what does the DAR Museum have? What were the most common items in a kitchen in the colonial period in this part of the country? And you can see there's a lot of things on this list here. And some of them aren't used for cooking, of course, but these are the basic things that a coppersmith would be making or would be imported from a dry goods store. So, of course, chocolate pots and cider kettles and all those kinds of things are, for cookware, but a fuller's kettle and a hatter's kettle, those were, not. So those are some of the things that were a good list of the items that were made out of copper. And so it's time to talk about tea kettles. We have a lot of tea kettles in the collection. They were the most common form in the 18th century. Everybody needed a tea kettle. A lot of them were made in Pennsylvania, and there's a variety of sizes, from ones that are just 6 inches tall to great big ones that were enormous and probably used in large kitchens. And they weren't just for making tea. They could heat up any water for any purpose. If you were boiling water for a stew or something, and you wanted to get it boiling really quickly, as I mentioned, the tea kettle made of copper heats it up really quickly, and conducts it very well. So we have 8 tea kettles in the collection. Here's one. There's another. Isn't that just a lovely ear holding the handle on? There's another. That one is not polished, so it does not look as great as the other ones. This one is a very small one. This one is only about 4 inches high. It's really lovely, and it has the wonderful spout. Then another one. And this one has been over polished. That's why it has this dark look on it before it came to us. And the next item that we're going to talk about is the fish kettle. Now, these seem kind of odd, like a very specific tool in a time when they weren't as, you know, like today when we have every kitchen gadget you can imagine. They had fish kettles? But yes, they did. And I found them in so many inventories in early 18th into early 19th century in Virginia and Maryland. And they were very popular, and they were almost always made of copper. I only found one in several hundred made of tin. And so these were very common. So fish kettles were a sought-after tool. And this is the same fish kettle in our collection, just opened up. You can see in the bottom picture, that middle portion is the lifter. The fish would sit on that, and you could lower it in with those handles, and then it would steam so nicely, and you could lift it back out, and it was a really great tool for that. And you can see that the inside of the main part is tinned. So the next item is a dipper. This is just the same dipper, the front and back, and this was a mid-19th century dipper. You can see the handle is riveted on, and it's just such a multi-purpose tool. You could use this for anything. Think about, you know, you probably have a dipper in your kitchen, and you use it for so many different things to, you know, take something out of your pot of soup, put something in easily, taste it, so many different things this dipper can be used for. And so I'm really glad we have one in the collection. We only have the one, though. We have more made out of brass, and I do see a lot in inventories that were made out of brass. So I think that maybe there were a little more made out of brass. And then this kettle. So this is a kettle, and it's really big. You can see from the dimensions, it's very big. And this was for making apple butter. In Pennsylvania, especially, apple butter is a main staple, and it was in the 18th and 19th centuries, and in many parts today, it still really is a main staple. Every time I go back home to Western PA, I have my apple butter sources I go and I get. But once you press the juice out of the apples, you had to boil it down for a long time to get apple butter. And these kettles, because they are copper, would heat it up nicely and evenly. And you can see this kettle is so black on the outside from the soot. It's been really used. And so to do this, someone sat there and stirred it for hours with a stirrer like this. I thought this was a good picture because there's a hand to give you some perspective. It has these holes in it so that when you stir it through the paddle, through the juice, it goes through easily. And they, you know, as it was boiling down, add more juice to it. But the apple butter kettle was really important because this was something that was then canned in earthenware jars and used all year round. And it was, it's really good on pumpernickel bread, in my opinion, or just on a spoon. So that's the apple butter stir. And then a measure. I mean, we all have those Pyrex, those glass Pyrex measures that have the great, you know, markings on it. And these were so common, and I find a lot of these, I've seen a lot of these in antique stores and in other museum collections. These were just really common, and you knew as a cook in your kitchen, you knew exactly how much it held. If you wanted to fill it halfway with a grain or a liquid, you knew exactly how much it was and for the purpose that you intended. And I'm sure everybody had their own way of gauging how much was in it for use. So yeah, a measure, and we see a lot of these. These were very common. And then another very common item, the stew pan. This was such a workhorse in the kitchen also. This one is one that would be of a heavier gauge. The copper sheet, the coppersmith would have made it out of a heavier gauge because this would get so much use and be over the hot part of the fire. And so the bottom would be much heavier. So that's why you don't see the rim around the edge like you do with some of the lighter weight items. And then a stew pan, that's what it did. It stewed things, which is different than boiling. Stewing, if you cook, you know, stewing is using a smaller amount of water than boiling requires because you're trying to get it thick and stewy like a good stew. So these usually came with a lid also. Ours doesn't have one, but you know, you can't have it all. Someday maybe we'll have one with a lovely lid on it. And it had a nice long handle, and it could sit on a trivet over the fire and be used that way. And a strainer or colander. These were also very common. You read a lot of 18th century recipes and early 19th century recipes that call for straining something out before continuing to cook it or something like that. And this is what was used, these kinds of things. This is what I showed you at the beginning that has the heavy rolled edge on it with the wire, heavy wire in it. These were great. This has wonderful handles that are far enough away that you're not going to get too hot if you pour, boiling things in it. They were listed in a lot of the inventories I looked at too, from the 17th through the 19th centuries. A lot of them had a foot rim on them to lift them up when you would dump it out so it didn't sit in whatever liquid. Ours doesn't, but it's still, very useful in that way. And these were also listed in a lot of the ads from the coppersmiths or the dry goods purveyors too. So, and then another item that helps keep things warm, like at the beginning when I showed you the foot warmer, the bed warmer, these chafing dishes help to keep things warm, from your tea kettle to more water. They were very useful, and again, found in a lot of inventories. They were kept by the fire, over coals. This one has feet on it. They're, just a few inches high, just maybe 2 inches high. They are described and recommended in household management books and in cookbooks that, every good cook has to have a chafing dish nearby to, have some swing space to keep something hot. And so and hot water was always in demand when you're cooking. We take it for granted now. We can just get it hot out of the tap, and that wasn't even a possibility in a lot of kitchens. So, so this is the last item I have to show you, because we have this is all we have in the collection. We don't have a huge copper collection, but we have a few other items made out of copper that weren't used in the kitchen. There's coins, of course. There were copper plates that printers used. We don't have any of them, but that was another thing that was made out of copper. But what we have are a lot of tea kettles, and I think that's really important because tea kettles were so important. And you find at least one in most inventories. Somebody might have a copper tea kettle, 2 copper tea kettles, and an iron tea kettle. And so you see them so much in the inventories and in ads that these things were really important, and in descriptions even too. I lied. I have one more thing to show you. I'm sorry about that. This is another little kettle, and I have to tell you, this is my favorite item of the copper stuff. It's just so cute. It's just a little guy, but it could really do a lot in this little base that it has. And you can see the wonderful marks around it, and the great handles on it like the strainer had. But this was also a little workhorse in the kitchen, and was really well used too. You can see from the lid is bent, but it's definitely the lid that went with this, and it's just a really wonderful piece. And it is just a nice one, and it's always on display in the Oklahoma kitchen. So if you are able to get here or look online at Smartify, I think you'll be able to see it. So as I was saying about tea kettles, you find them by so many kitchens, and this wonderful watercolor sketch by Lewis Miller shows this woman cooking in her at her hearth, and there sits a copper kettle right in front, keeping water hot, ready to go for whenever she needed the hot water, maybe for the duck laying on the ground beside her, or to add more to the cast iron kettles hanging over the fire. That tea kettle was ready and working for her. And so that is what I have for you today. So if you do have some questions, I am happy to answer what I can.
We do have some questions. So first one was, I think it came in during the apple butter slide. And the question is, did the heat from the fireplaces soften the copper pans? Did they have to be kept away from a direct flame?
Well, they were. If it was a kettle, like that little one I just showed you, this one, these have thicker bottoms on them, so they could be right over the coals and really close to the fire. But and the copper kettle for the apple butter was a really heavy gauge, so it could be really close to the fire too. But the tea kettles usually were not. They could be hung over a fire, but they'd be high enough away that they wouldn't damage it. And that's why you would see sometimes coppersmiths who did mending, they were repairing tea kettle bottoms. because maybe they did get too hot for an extended period of time. They could get hot, but not for an extended period of time.
Great. Next question is related to the care of copper objects that people currently have. So should we clean the tarnish from the copper pots and pans before using to preserve it, or is it better to leave the tarnish?
Well, one thing you always want to make sure of with copper, if it's old copper, is that is there lead inside of it? So that's always a concern. I don't use it because, you know, I just have it in the museum collection, so we don't use it. What we have done is had a conservator would polish it and then put a lacquer on it so that it wouldn't tarnish anymore. But at home, you want it to look nice, I'm sure. So I think you can do some polishing, but do be careful about what you put in it if you're going to cook with it to make sure that it isn't have lead. It doesn't have lead in the interior.
Well, that's a good point. And that brings us to our next question. So great presentation, Carrie. How did early people realize that using pure copper was toxic, or was the tin lining used to strengthen the objects without this understanding, which in retrospect saved lives? And what's the history of the recoating of copper with tin in early America? I.e., did they wait, in which case the chance of copper absorption and then illness and toxicity increased?
When copper was used, even in England, they were tinning the interior of it. So I think that it came about, and I'm absolutely not an expert on this. I think that it was something they realized, you know, maybe through experience. And so it had been tinned for a while. And I was reading some descriptions, like when I showed you at the beginning that the coppersmith's workshop, that's from 1857. And they give a whole list of what was done to copper and how to preserve it, and they described tinning and to make sure that it was done in there so that it wouldn't give the food a funny taste or leach the copper into it. So I believe it had been, that knowledge had been passed down. And what was the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was, in retrospect, did they wait, in which cases of the chances of user copper absorption and then toxicity increased?
No, they would wait until it started wearing off and then have it retinned.
Okay.
They would notice it if it's at the bottom, you know, if it's in key places, if it's around the rims, you know, maybe not. Yeah. I don't have any direct sources about that though. I'm sure they're out there. I just don't know where they are yet.
Yeah. Can you repeat how many Indian pelts were traded for a copper tea kettle?
It was 50 animal skins.
So 50.
50, yeah.
And did it matter the animal? Like,
now that is not included in the account, and this was an account from the I think 1500s. So they were they weren't as clear as we would like them to have been.
Can you specify, please?
Yeah, is that beaver? Is that deer? You know, absolutely. I wish I knew. And that again, someone else may have written that. Hopefully, I'll find it someday.
Yeah. And then we do have another question. Are you looking for copper donations to the museum's collection, say from people's personal collections?
Absolutely. We'd love to consider if someone has something that we would be interested in. And I would be the curator looking at the cooking equipment, but we have another curator who works on other metals and would be interested in, other types of copper, like the bed warmer and the foot warmer. But yeah, you see what we have. I showed you everything we have in the copper cookware. So yes.
And the best way to do that would be to take a picture of it and then just shoot us an email at museum@dar.org. And in the heading, you can put potential copper donation or something like that. And what happens is it goes to a centralized email, and then it gets sent out to the appropriate curator. And then the appropriate curator will contact you and see if they have more questions, they want to know about it, if you know where it came from, things like that, and we'll follow up on that. But the easiest way to start is to just email us at museum@dar.org.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Sarah. Because yes, we are always looking to improve because these are household items, and we love to do our best to show you what different homes were like, and I could add more to. I could have another copper talk someday.
There you go, new copper
lately arrived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question is there a good way to store copper to keep it from turning a green patina?
Unless you can store it in an airtight bag. That's it. It's oxidation. It's from the air. So what we do when we store silver and other metals that tarnish, we put them in a bag with a piece of corrosion intercept in it. So mostly with silver that works because it tarnishes much more quickly than copper does. But yeah, that's the only,
Just
I'm
wave
in
your
the dark.
arms.
Excuse
Yeah,
me.
wave your arms. Carrie is in our conference room, and
So sorry.
the lights are on a motion sensor, so just making sure she's okay in there.
Sorry.
We have another question related to donations. Are you interested in 1700 and 1800 period donations, or are you sometimes interested in 1900?
Early 1900s we'll consider because we do have period rooms that that address that time period.
Is there something like there's no guarantees, and there's always things that we like, oh, funny thing is we have a dozen of those.
Yeah.
For example, spinning wheels, I think we're set for
Yeah.
a while.
No,
But it never hurts
no,
to
no.
send it in. Oh, okay.
Right, because the spinning wheels we have are not in great shape. We have some that are really great, but we could use some other ones.
Okay.
Good ones that have a great family history with them. That's what we're always looking for too, is a good history with it. But with copper, I mean, I showed you, we just have that tiny little kettle and the giant apple butter kettle. I'd love a medium-sized kettle.
Medium kettle. All right. I think that's all the questions that we have. Gail just wanted to let you know that this was a marvelous presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
And
thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun working on this because it's so much fun when you do this to really bring it together and to talk about how this was used and what was used. And I'm glad you enjoyed it.
All right. Well, thank you, Carrie, for joining us today. And we hope you all have an enjoyable rest of your day. Thank you all for joining us.